guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today, since Halloween is coming up, I thought we would talk about the big no-no of Halloween, cultural appropriation. So I've talked about this before, so you probably, if you've been following me for that long, know how I feel about this. However, I was sent a really interesting article about cultural appropriation, and it was very, very specific. Let's just get into it. So it's an article from Bustle, and it's titled 10 Culturally Appropriative Halloween Costumes You Should Never Wear. It has this whole introductory paragraph that really doesn't do anything except to kind of tell us off, and it mentions Ozamundia James, who's a professor and vice dean at the University of Miami School of Law, and they do that mainly for shock value, I'm pretty sure, because when you hear professor, you take someone more seriously, when in reality there are plenty of professors that still are driven by a political narrative. Whether it's true or not doesn't come down to the professor. But anyway, this professor says, conduct that presents white people as normal while presenting other as exotic is racist. Translation: when white people dress like stereotyped versions of people of color for Halloween, it's racist and hurtful. Is appropriation still appropriation if it happened in a country where white people are a minority? Because this is all centered around whiteness. So I'm kind of wondering about that. If anyone knows the answer, let me know. So anyway, they go on, they say really unimportant things. I'll link it in the description if you want to see. It's really not groundbreaking. So number one on the list is a ninja. So tell your kids that's not okay anymore. Movies and TV make ninjas look super sexy, but most of what we know about ninjas is wrong, Kotaku reports. Ninjas aren't super sneaky characters that fight in dark shadows. They're real people who existed in Japan and did similar work to our modern day CIA, says Kotaku. This costume is essentially a parody of the real life ninjas who existed in Japan. I feel like this is more of a critique of Hollywood than it is a critique of appropriation, because they're saying that movies and TV, and what control do I have on that? If I wanted to dress up as a ninja and Hollywood makes ninjas look a certain way, so then the costumer made a certain way, how does that have anything to do with my personal choice to dress up as that? I'm just wondering. The way you characterize ninjas is really up to you, because I never associated ninjas with sexiness. I associated them with being badass. Now, every costume has a sexy version. That's just what Halloween does, but it doesn't mean that everyone views ninjas as sexy. An Egyptian queen. Even if you're taking a costume from history, it can still bring up ugly reminders of violent past. According to the ancient history encyclopedia, the Ankh, don't know if I pronounced that right, which is what the woman in this picture is holding, was appropriated by the Christians in the 4th century, current era, as a symbol for their god. This might just seems like a beautiful costume. Journalism today. Journalism. This might just seems like a beautiful costume, but it's a symbol of a culture that was violently appropriated centuries ago. I'm going to avoid commenting on every one of them because otherwise this video is going to be way too long. A voodoo witch doctor. According to NPR, voodoo is often used as a catch-all term for several related religions practiced in Louisiana, Brazil, the Dominican Republic, and Cuba. The most well-known in America, says NPR, is Haitian voodoo. None of these religions bear any resemblance to the Hollywood versions of voodoo, NPR reports, so dressing as a voodoo witch doctor for Halloween only exacerbates harmful stereotypes about real religions. Again, this is about Hollywood. This isn't about the individual. If you have a problem with Hollywood, write an article about that. A Native American princess. This one was expected. Dressing up like another racial group for Halloween is never acceptable, ever. This costume is especially gross considering the mass genocide of Indigenous Americans during the time of the United States founding, and considering that Native Americans continue to experience discrimination on an exceptionally high level, according to NPR. So the main source of this article is NPR. No scholars, no numbers. All right, number 6. This one's actually kind of funny. Anything that has to do with Day of the Dead. Okay, nothing, not even dead. Halloween and the Day of the Dead are not the same, and even if they were, it wouldn't be cool to use symbols from the latter to celebrate the former. According to Pop Sugar, oh sorry, they also use Pop Sugar, not just NPR, totally legit. Dia de los Muertos is a Mexican holiday celebrated on November 1st, which is All Souls Day to honor friends and family who have passed away. Sugar skulls, or calaveras, says Pop Sugar, are a symbol of Dia de los Muertos, not a costume for people to take on and off. Not and, just saying. A geisha. Many don the geisha costume under the assumption that it's sexy, but there are a number of reasons why that's super not cool. For one, geishas were entertainers, but they were not sex workers, as many people falsely believe. For another, it's deeply problematic to dress up as a stereotyped version of a cultural figure. Just don't do it. I love how they give thorough explanations as to why. A señorita, a lady, you're not allowed to dress like a lady with Mexican colors. There are also Italian colors and a bunch of other flags, but all right. The colors of the Mexican flag represented, the motive behind this costume is to have the wearer take on the appearance and symbols of another culture for a night. Mexican culture is not a costume. A Bollywood star. Bollywood is a popular genre around the world, but wearing traditional Indian dress and calling it Bollywood isn't a costume. It's an offensive stereotype that flattens of all Indian culture into a trope. I'm sorry, but the writing of this is just crazy. Do they not have Grammarly? This is embarrassing, honestly. A gypsy. The G word is actually a slur according to the National Organization for Women, because it has historically been used to stigmatize and discriminate against Romani people, an actual ethnic minority group with a history of persecution in Europe. It isn't code for a free-spirited person with wanderlust, and costumes appropriating this culture play into the history of discrimination. So I think we've lost enough brain cells for now. One of the main points I wanted to make before we read the comments and reactions to the costumes is that appropriation and racism are two different things, though they're often conflated. So racism to me is usually quite evident, whereas cultural appropriation seems to be quite subtle, because if it were completely evident, we would not need to have an article pointing out what's not okay about certain costumes. If you were in a costume of like a KKK member holding a mannequin of a black person that's like dead or something like that, that's obviously racist, okay? There's a difference between that and wearing a costume of, say, Pocahontas, because that's also a difficult line to draw. If you're dressed up as a Native American, how do you know if the person's dressed as a character or as just like a Native American? And if they're just dressed as a Native American, is that okay? Or is it okay to be Pocahontas, or is it okay to be neither? Like, where do you draw the line on that kind of stuff? Because characters are fictional, so I don't feel like that would be an appropriation because it's from fiction. So just because the fiction is based on something that historically happened, then what do you do? Do you understand why I'm saying this is more difficult than just racist? A lot of people in the messages talked about intent, and I think that intent is a really important point when we talk about cultural appropriation, because intent essentially is the bottom line. Like, are you mocking? Are you appreciating? Are you dressing up just because you like it? The problem is intent is not obvious. Unless someone is screaming in your face about how they hate X people and they're obviously racist, how are you going to tell if they're genuinely wearing the costume or wearing whatever as a sign of cultural appreciation versus wearing it in a mocking way? Sometimes it's very black and white, but most of the time it's not gonna be. So that's the problem with intent. Like, I completely understand that that's a pivotal part of deciding whether something's appropriation, but you can't know intent unless someone tells you. And I feel like people would get screamed at before they're even able to say, oh, my intent was. I feel like the people who are claiming cultural appropriation are not the people of the culture. A lot of the time, it's people who have nothing to do with the culture and are claiming to be offended on the part of other people, which I think is not only extremely ridiculous, but it's also patronizing, and you're imposing victimhood on people who might not want it. So for example, with the geisha costume, you don't know how geishas feel about this unless you are a geisha, and most of the people who are complaining about it probably aren't geishas. So why are you imposing this victimhood of, oh, they're like appropriating your geisha culture or whatever? You know what I mean? I always find that kind of interesting, which is why I asked minorities or people from marginalized groups to tell me their opinions. So let's read some responses. Jill says, I'm from Puerto Rico. I love Halloween and I don't really mind people dressing up as other cultures as long as they're not racist. I do, however, have an issue with costumes that are subjects of pedophilia, homophobia, xenophobia, etc. I don't care if a white person wears a taco costume for Halloween. I just want to get drunk, watch horror movies, and eat candy for Halloween. So then she says, this is what I mean with racist costumes, which is clear and evident, like I said before. This is what I mean with offensive costumes, which is also very evident why it's offensive. So then she goes on to say, once I show her the costumes, she says that she personally doesn't find any of them inappropriate or offensive, but other people might. It's all about perspective. Halloween is supposed to be fun and pretend to be someone that you're not for a night. Another person said, hey, I used to be what you called an SJW back in the day, and my idea of cultural appropriation was very black and white, lol, but since I no longer have the same views and ideas, my opinion on the topic has changed as well. In my opinion, if you're dressed up in traditional attire from whatever culture and you were invited into it, then I don't think there's any problem. And I then asked, so once they have some kind of invitation, then it's fine? Also, could you tell me if you find any of these costumes offensive? So I sent her the link to the article we just read, and this person said, dressing for Halloween, it's different. A lot of people don't think about it and just choose something they think would look cool or whatever, and a lot of times they don't do it to be racist or offensive, but that can be a problem since a lot of these traditional attire has been to the people of that culture, and that can be seen as disrespectful. The Anon then goes on to say that yes, that's basically what I think. If your friend from that culture invites you to it, or it's appropriate for you in the occasion, I don't think there should be a problem. The only ones I found inappropriate, to be honest, was the voodoo one and the G word one. Because with voodoo, that's actually a religion, but then if we go by that, they should have also put something about people dressing like nuns. I didn't read the article, to be honest, and the G one because the amount of people that were actually murdered for being that. Another person said, I don't even know where to begin on cultural appropriation, especially when it involves native indigenous traditions and garb. I'm going to try and be as concise as possible, but every time I try and write it out, I go on a tangent. So then I ask about the article, and the person says, personally, I don't mind if someone is clearly dressed as a character from a movie or video game, or a specific person from history. It's not my place to give my 2 cents on anything other than the Native American princess, but if someone wants to dress up as Pocahontas, that is fine with me as long as it's very clearly a character. Cosplay all day, honey. I start to have a problem when the costume is more generalized. It's frustrating because when a white person dresses as a native princess, it's trendy and cool, but in the past, when actual native people wanted to preserve their culture, they were punished. It comes off as very ignorant, especially in Canada, where there is the history of residential schools and so many missing and murdered indigenous people. Because of colonization, we have lost our way of life, our oral history, our languages, complete tribes, etc. And that's only scratching the surface. So yes, the Native American princess is offensive to me, but that is just my personal opinion. So then I ask someone else and they say, regarding your cultural appropriation post, I'm Hawaiian, Chinese, Korean, Portuguese. Growing up, I've been dressed as a geisha and a Native American for Halloween. I've also been a Dalmatian, an elf, and one year I wore a vintage army jacket and carried a water gun. The common SJW argument, at least what I've been seeing, is that you dress up as a character, i.e. Mulan or Pocahontas, it's totally fine, but you cannot wear a culture as a costume. I beg to differ. Do I feel offended when white people throw tacky luau with horrible rainbow leis and grass skirts? No, they're dressing up, having fun, and it's completely harmless to me and my culture. If they want to look ridiculous, that's on them, lol. A lot of people are just trying to have one day a year where they can let loose and dress out of character. Simple costumes that resemble the cultural trappings of other countries are just that, costumes. If you're affected by naive other people in regards to your culture, I recommend taking the opportunity to educate them. Maybe let them see or even use the traditional version of the costume, or asking them to join you and your family to a traditional celebration. I'm just rambling, but you get what I'm saying, right? So then I asked about the costumes. This person was like, oh my god, so many thoughts. I honestly can't even dial them down. I could say I partially empathize with the idea, again, the naivety of culture and history, but again, in my opinion, it's completely harmless. From my understanding, appropriation is the act of taking something from someone else, what has been taken from me or anyone else. When someone wears a costume, it doesn't take anything away from me. My culture and history is the same. It really doesn't affect me at all, really. I'm a big believer that you can't change anyone, you can only change yourself and how you react to things. Once more, I believe if someone is offended by the actions of others, it's an opportunity to educate. So I thought that was really interesting. I saw your tweet wanting marginalized opinions on cultural appropriation and Halloween, and I was hoping my input would be helpful, especially since I'm what you'd likely call an SJW. I think people conflate the issue. Well-meaning but naive young teens and tween, as well as those that like to twist the issue for their own now reactionary biases, tend to assume any instance in which a non-black person dresses up as a black character is the problem. That's not. However, reducing certain people to the ugliest stereotypes is in poor taste. I went to a predominantly white college, and there was definitely something pointedly uncomfortable about seeing my classmate, who was a sweet girl and I'm still close with, dress as a black girl, weave and plastic EBT card included. I know this was very long, but I hope this was useful for your video. And so I said that I totally agree with conflation, as I mentioned earlier. So anyway, I asked about the costumes, and this person said, most of these costumes don't seem offensive at all. Only 2 were kind of problematic, and that was the Native American and the Señorita. Costumes solely based off of race are a little iffy for me. The ninja is such a reach though, especially since it's a small subset of Japanese culture / folklore. I don't know about the voodoo one, but I actually thought it looked really cool, to be honest, lol. I don't know about the circumstances on why that would even be considered offensive. As for the sugar skull one, I can get where the wariness comes from, but I don't think it's all that offensive. Recently with Coco, I've seen kids really embrace the culture behind Sugar Skull and would want to emulate what they saw in the movie. I think people who wrote the article were being a little overzealous in preemptively avoiding offensive practices that they themselves kind of boiled down vast and interesting cultures to something very simple. I think a lot of the problems people have in appropriation stems from a lack of recognition and appreciation. In the end, like I said before, I think the bottom line comes down to intent, but intent cannot be read in people's faces. There's no sign pointing down saying, hey, this is my intention. So I think the rule really is that there's appropriation, which I don't think is a thing, and there's racism. If it's racism, it's not okay. Everything else, I'm just kind of like, does it really need to be that deep? And you can leave me your thoughts in the comments, whether you think appropriation is a thing, whether it shouldn't be that deep. What do you think? And let me know what you think of the costumes in the article too, specifically. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. I'm sorry if this was a little all over the place. It was the first time I ever really incorporated what people were responding, so it was a bit difficult to do that for me. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you to my patrons as always, and let's get right into the fan art.